Welcome back to Bucks Beat, episode 114. And today we're going to talk Georgia football recruiting. Let's bring on our guest, Jeff Sintel of Dog Nation, covering recruiting here in the state of Georgia and covering the Bulldogs. And, Jeff, here we go, man. It's a busy time of the year for you. The rest of us are putting our feet up, but you got the summer push going on right now, don't you?
Yeah, really, Buck. There are two main months of the recruiting calendar when you get your work done. June is when you bring in your new talent, your high school players. June is when you court them. July is when you get them committed. And then the other big month in the recruiting calendar is retaining, and that's December, retaining the guys after the end of your regular season or championship game. And Buck, just as a means of perspective, roughly 85% of all the high school football players in America, at least for the Power Fives, will take their official visits in the month of June. Georgia has 4 straight weeks of it, including, I believe, double digits, 15, 16 official visitors this weekend.
No wonder these assistants are looking to jump to the NFL, right, with the way the college system's set up right now. Currently, Georgia with 9 verbal commitments as they head into the summer. And give us a little feedback on the Jared Curtis signing that happened a few weeks ago, the nation's top-rated quarterback. What was your take on getting Jared Curtis into the fold?
Well, Buck, it's interesting. I know you'll love the quarterback position, and yeah, I do frown on player parallels, but that's the quickest way to get the average fan or even the leaned-in recruiting zealot the attention. Buck, if you put the high school arm of Jared Curtis and you put him on a field with what Matthew Stafford looked like in high school, and nobody saw it, but what Josh Allen looked like in high school because he didn't even have an offer, but it's going to hang around. That's the best way I can say that. Now, he plays in Nashville Christian in Tennessee. That's not a very strong league. As a benchmark here, Prince Avenue Christian, one of the best small schools in the state of Georgia, highly decorated state championship program. They played him 2 years ago. Jared's sophomore season, they beat him 42-0. But Jared has all the tools. 6'4", has those funny, incredible Pat Mahomes arm angles now. He can drop it in the slot. He can play shortstop out there at quarterback. He's got some kind of ability to get out of trouble under duress. I mean, he's not going to do that in the SEC, Buck, unless it's in the red zone. But he's about 6'4", he's about 220. Going to be very hard to get on the ground. In high school, he scores about 15 to 20 touchdowns a season with a big arm, a major arm. And what's happening this year, Buck, is Jared's going to be the crown jewel of this Georgia class. And what Georgia and Mike Bobo and Kirby Smart are doing is they're going to build around the jewel. They're going to find ways to amplify his skill set. That means tight end. That means receivers. That means running back. And it's the feeling here, Buck. My feeling here is that the spend, because that's now part of recruiting, the spend is going to be greater on the offensive side of the ball this year than the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I really was impressed watching his highlight reel and watching all the things that he's able to do. You know, my only concern making the jump to major college football is the speed of the game. As you mentioned, extending plays, scrambling, that kind of thing. But he looks like he's got a lot of skills, and looking forward to see him play in a Bulldog uniform. So Georgia lost out on the other big target here. Jackson Cantwell, the offensive tackle, decided he was going to go play for the Miami Hurricanes. And so that was the one big loss they've had here coming in as far as this class goes. What was your takeaway with that?
Well, I feel like, Buck, if this was the old days, he would have been committed to Georgia like 6, 7, 8 months ago, because everything was there with the fit, but it's kind of a matter of, like, to put it into perspective, Jared told me, let's talk about it like a golf tournament terminology. He told me that he said, you know what, Jackson said, it's kind of like this. Georgia had already qualified for the playoffs. Like, Georgia was already a leader in the clubhouse. and they were down to the playoff. And it just was a matter of who was going to get in the playoff with Georgia for Jackson Cantwell. Turned out for a while it looked like Oregon. It turned out it was going to be Miami. And I believe, Buck, that Georgia extended itself a lot financially to try and land Jackson Cantwell. I mean, the market here, Buck, which has been reported everywhere, if you're going to get a five-star offensive tackle, the market now is somewhere around $1.8 to $2.5 million per year. That's coming in. And I don't think Georgia's billfold was that big. I don't think they thought they were going to spend that much on a freshman offensive tackle. There are a lot of reasons why, a lot of good reasons why. But then Miami came in with just a monster bid, and that kind of won the day. There was points in the Jackson Cantwell recruitment, man, where he looked like he was going to go to Georgia, and then Miami came in, and I guess we could say they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Drew Rosenhaus, Buck, we're used to hearing that name in NFL deals, NFL draft time. Well, Drew Rosenhaus was not only big Rosenhaus sports for the Jackson Cantwell recruitment. A lot of Dog fans were literally clutching their pearls over the last week, man, because Drew Rosenhaus also signed Seven Cloud, Georgia's defensive tackle prize recruit, the number one JUCO recruit in the country. And that's a great story there, Buck, because Seven was originally supposed to be a 2023 high schooler, got diverted, class of 2023, was once committed to Georgia, dropped out of high school, got his GED, went to junior college, and recommitted to Georgia. And now Rosenhaus, he's got him signed up as one of his clients. And now maybe Seven is going to cost a lot more, maybe seven figures. But that's kind of par for the course with recruiting these days.
Wanted to dive into a young man here in the metro Atlanta area that has really gotten my attention is Tyler Atkinson out of Grayson High. Saw the state title game this past year on TV and walked away really impressed with what this young man brings to the table. Georgia's done a great job with Kirby, basically with the whole entire recruiting class, but specifically at linebacker. They have a long list of success with these outstanding linebackers. Tyler Atkinson, as I understand it, I read your piece on Tyler recently. He's been on board as far as being a Georgia fan for a number of years. I understand that he and Glenn Schumann with a really tight relationship, but got a lot of big-time programs coming after him right now.
Yeah, it's funny. Georgia's kind of pulling out all the big guns there, Buck. They've got Jalen Walker talking to him. He had a recent conversation with Roquan Smith, and I think that's a good name to use here, Buck, because I think as you're talking state of Georgia inside the box linebackers, I think Tyler Atkinson is the best one since Roquan came out of Macon County many years ago. It seems like now, but it's going to be interesting because you wonder, Bucky, you're like, okay, what does Georgia really need? I think they really want to go get the nation's number one tight end, Mark Bowman out of California. He's a 5-star. Georgia's going to have to get into a Texas-sized bidding war with Texas for him. And I wonder how much they're going to spend at linebacker when they just signed the number one linebacker in the country last year, Zayden Walker out of Sly County. And then they've still got Chris Cole and Justin Williams with at least two more seasons, at least one more season after this recruiting class, the current one signed. So I think, is Ohio State, is Tennessee, is Clemson going to spend more money for Atkinson than Georgia would? Now, there is a very strong relationship here. The Atkinson camp, I can tell you this, it is very professional. He's already got an NIL deal with Adidas, one of the rare high schoolers in the country to have one of those. But everything about this recruitment is going to be calculated. They don't want to make a decommitment. They don't like the way that looks, but it would be a natural marriage between Atkinson and the Bulldogs, because Bucky can quickly say, anybody can go, who's developed more linebackers for the NFL in the last 10 years than Georgia, Kirby Smart, and Glenn Schumann? Not only you have the first rounders, there's 4, you've got 3 Butkus Award winners. So I think Atkinson's going to have to take a good look about whether he wants what's the best situation for him right now in 2026, or perhaps what's the best situation for him in 2028 or 2029 when he would be an NFL draft prospect. I'll be honest, Buck, I think Tyler can get to the NFL and be a high draft pick. If he goes to Sacramento State, if he goes to Wofford, if he goes to Georgia Tech, if he goes to UTC, I think he can get there from anywhere. He's that talented. He had 170 tackles in his freshman year in Class 6A ball. So he can get there from anywhere. The big question of the summer will be, will he get there from Georgia?
And when you hear, just reading and hearing about Atkinson and how Clemson now has prioritized his recruiting, what exactly does that mean? They're calling him every day?
No. Well, here's a good example. They sent everybody to Grayson High School that coaches on the defensive staff. And, that program, Grayson High, has those connections with Mickey Kahn and his father. I think the facilities and the field house are named after the Kahn family. So there's a lot of love there. And, Atkinson's looking like he's going to do things different. Buck, a lot of times these days, these young men announce their 6 or 7 official visits because the NCAA will let them take as many as they want now. They announce those in January, February, March. Well, it looks like Atkinson, at least right now, is going to take them one by one and have some suspense to it, some drama to it. He's going to be in Clemson this weekend for his first official visit. And what Clemson does, they got a little sleight of hand here. What they try to do is they only try to take official visitors. They only schedule it for one weekend in the summer, and that's this weekend. So they got some marketing tricks up their sleeve with scarcity and exclusivity. If you want to see Clemson, if you want to take an official visit to see Dabo, you got to do it this one weekend. So when everybody else would love to have a guy like Atkinson, Georgia would love to have him in this weekend, but he knows he can catch Georgia later in the summer on another weekend. So that's why he's at Clemson. Tennessee's going to want to pull hard for Atkinson, and also Ohio State. Like, if you talk to most people around the country, most people used to think Atkinson was a heavy Georgia lean a couple months ago, and now Georgia's really kind of tighter than a Talladega turn, swapping paint with Clemson, Ohio State, Tennessee, maybe Auburn for Atkinson as well.
Jeff, the wide receiver position, is that a position that Kirby and his staff are really diving into in this 2026 recruiting class? I see where they've got the slot receiver Vance Pafford out of California as a verbal commitment. Is it Brady Marchese also verbally committed to Georgia? And they're working on Craig Dandridge out of Cambridge here in Alpharetta. This receiver class is something that they're pouring into right now.
Well, they realize, Buck, I think they learned from last year. They never want to get to a situation anymore where they don't have playmakers and they don't have NFL guys at receiver, because that was a desert of playmakers last year with what they had to work with Carson Beck's final season in Athens. And I think Georgia is really confident on what they spent and what they got last year at receiver, especially in the high school ranks. Talon Taylor, the first 5-star since George Pickens in 2019. And then C.J. Wiley out of Milton, a guy who's already turned a lot of heads in Athens through spring practice and then summer workouts already. I feel like they're going to get really nice pieces, but not those first-rounder types that they got in the past cycle, including the transfer portal guy, Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch. I think the way that they're going to look at receivers is totally different. James Coley told me at the media availability at the Sugar Bowl that he looks at a guy now and he says, can he create instant separation? That's a box that's got to be checked. They don't have to be schemed to get open. We look at him and say in the SEC, he's going to be recruited, he's going to be covered by future NFL guys. That means he's got to be an NFL guy. So those are the criteria they're looking for. Vance Spafford is also somebody that Georgia's going to have to work for. Pretty big nemesis in this cycle is turning out to be Miami. Miami is going to go hard after Spafford. So will Washington, a couple of other schools. He just took an Ole Miss official visit a couple weeks ago. So he's been committed to Georgia for a long time, and he really wants to play with the 5-star tight end Mark Bowman. But I think this year at receiver, they do want to get talents that complement Jared Curtis, but at the same time, they've got to realize, I use this word a lot talking recruiting these days. It's no longer that family feel, Buck, or that hometown feeling. There's a little bit of the NIL equation involved in every one of these recruiting stories now.
Defensive back looks like is a priority in this recruiting class. They've already, 4 verbal commitments from safeties
Yeah,
already,
yeah.
and now busy working on the cornerback spot.
Yeah, they like Peyton Dyer out of Duluth. That's where George Rogers came from. But they like him a lot. Bookie looks like he could play right away. Maybe some of the hesitation with Ellis Robinson last year, who I still think is going to be one of the finest corners Georgia's ever had, was he needed to put on weight. He needed to get into that 190, 195-pound range. Peyton Dyer already looks like that right now. Good speed, great physicality. He's a big time playmaker. And then you look at that, what they really want, Buck, a lot. You hear that term a lot in the Georgia defense. They use it a lot with Jalen Walker. They called it the chess piece. Well, Georgia likes its safeties to be highly versatile. They've got a great safety out of Warner Robins, Jordan Smith. They got Keelan Jones out of Sprayberry, a very rare Sprayberry recruit for the Dogs, first one since Rodrigo Blankenship. You start going down the list, they've got Zach Fort out of IMG Academy. Buck, that guy has Malachi Starks, Dan Jackson fusion all over him. Get this, he has been at powerful IMG Academy. That's the boarding school in Bradenton, Florida, where all the best players in the country go. At any given season, they got 40 to 50 D1 guys. Zach Fort has been the captain of that football team since his freshman year, a rare 4-year captain at IMG Academy. And Buck, he liked the Dogs so much, he silently committed after the Tennessee game last year and that experience. And he kept it silent until January, February, where he's like, man, I just got to go ahead and be a Dog. And that's what he is through and through. He shut down his recruiting. You want to talk about those Jalen Walker, Nakobe Dean, team leader types? That's Zach Fort. And you got to love the marketing of these young men, Buck. He must have some ad wizards behind him because he is spelling on his social media hashtag Go Dogs, but he's spelling Go Dogs with a Z. Obviously, he said he wanted to put some spice on it. And I was like, man, are you doing that because your first name, the first letter of your first name is also Z? And he's like, no, but maybe I need to. So props to him.
Right now, Georgia's somewhere in the teens as far as just looking at the composite of the recruiting rankings. Right now, Georgia, I believe, has been 1, 2, and 3 nationally in recruiting over the last 3 years, somewhere in there. Where do you think this class is going to end up?
It's going to be different, Buck. I think this is going to be a class with lots of Kirby Smart classes have like 10 or 11 guys ranked among the top 100. I think there's going to be a little bit of a slack, a little bit of a dip there with that one. I think they may have 10 or 11 guys in the top 200. Quite frankly, the reason, Buck, is they're now quite so expensive, man.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard to get 4 or 5 stars in a class because somebody's going to say, like a Maryland or a Mizzou or a South Carolina, they're going to say, that's our guy, that's our number one target. We're going to go all in on this guy. And it's going to make it hard for Georgia or an Alabama or even Ohio State to hoard those guys like they did in the past. And I think that's what's different. And, you know, with all these recruiting classes, I think Dog Nation probably has learned by now that they kind of feel fully confident in the powers of Kirby Smart. Get this, Buck, since he's been at Georgia, that's where he basically had 5 weeks in 2016 to retain Mecole Hardman and get Isaac Nauta, Ben Cleveland, and Jacob Eason. Since that short season, he has averaged having the number 2.4 recruiting class in the country for every year he's recruited for Georgia. And for anybody like me to think that he won't have a top 4, top 5 class, I think we're fooling ourselves.
They've always done a great job in state, and for good reason. A lot of great football players playing high school football here in the state and metro Atlanta. But I noticed that a couple of the top-rated guys are heading to Alabama. Got Griffin, the linebacker, one of the top-rated players, and Edmonds, is it?
Yeah.
Another player committed to Alabama. What's going on with that?
You'd think, Buck, that the defensive players would flock to Georgia now since Nick Saban is no longer no longer at Alabama. But Jordan's a young man that he's an awesome kid. He really knew what he wanted for the longest time, and for him, he kind of grew up Alabama. He kind of grew up leaning towards Alabama as a kid, and it's kind of funny because like his mom actually went to Georgia, and she would have been happy either way. But there's something about Alabama. I think the Caleb Downs example still rings true for a lot of guys, but Jordan just kind of felt like he just fit in better. And the interesting part about Jordan, most people will sit there and say, oh, Alabama just money whipped Georgia on this recruitment. Now, Georgia's still recruiting him, still would love to have him in for an official visit this weekend. That's the one that was scheduled. But he was a guy that got down to his top 5, top 6, very rare in this era. And he didn't even know about anything about NIL. NIL wasn't even a factor till he got down to his final group. And then he started moving forward for that. One thing that's also different that we've learned through our reporting, Buck, is a lot of times the way Kirby Smart wanted it, he would not want to talk the particulars of NIL until your official visit, when you can have that face-to-face and start shaping what NIL looks like. You know, he's been in press conferences saying, hey, if we're talking about NIL the first, second, or third time that we're getting to know these recruits in these first 2 or 3 real visits, then that person probably doesn't need to go to Georgia, because he'd be coming to Georgia for not the most Georgia way type reasons. And so that's kind of what Georgia, they just simply lost a recruiting battle there with Jorden Edmonds. The other guy, Xavier Griffin, he's out of Gainesville. He's kind of a unique fit because he was committed to USC for the longest time. And it's almost like an annual rite of spring, kind of like the azaleas at Augusta National, where there's a highly rated player out of Georgia that initially commits early to USC, only to decommit before the official visits start get going before their senior year. I think we've seen that happen 4 or 5 years in a row in the state of Georgia, where a highly rated 5-star commits to the Trojans early, then hits reverse and backs up off that pledge and ends up going somewhere else. Griffin is a guy where you can't really prioritize the same guys. Georgia has been prioritizing Tyler Atkinson for the longest time, since really he was in the 9th and 10th grade, back when Dan Lanning was the defensive coordinator. And for them, that relationship was always built. They had kind of always tried to train their efforts towards Atkinson as their guy in the class. Because the funny thing with Griffin at Gainesville, he's a remarkable see ball, find ball, hunt ball, get ball type guy. But he's not a guy that it looks like to me on film that is comfortable inside the box, inside those SEC boxes yet. He needs to put a little bit more weight on to really play in the interior of the teeth of those SEC defenses. So there's been a position fit for him. He was initially rated as an athlete. Some guys thought he might be a big safety. Others guys wondered whether he'd be an inside backer or an outside backer. And Georgia just could always look at a guy that there were really no questions whatsoever in terms of a fit with Tyler Atkinson. Kind of a taste test thing there more than anything else.
Jeff, appreciate your coverage and your insight. Best of luck trying to keep up with all this summer, brother.
Yeah, man, they probably will have about 26, 24, 25 committed probably by the end of August, first game of the season. And really, they'll just get a couple of guys cherry pick here and there from then on in.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
See you, man.
I was going to wrap it up for Bucks Beat. We'll be back later this week taking a look at the Georgia Bulldogs baseball team hosting the regional as the NCAA baseball tournament gets underway. Look forward to talking to you about that then. Have a great day, everybody. Appreciate you checking us out here at Bucks Beat.